This is so. What you will notice is that on the agenda it says Anne Currie. I am not Anne, at least not today. And Anne is unfortunately not here. She's not well, so I'm kind of. We agreed that I would stand in. You'll see why a bit later. So a little bit about me. I'm going to skip through these. These are just the standard me slides. I am a consultant, a CTO. Has anyone ever heard of serverless computing? Hands up. AWS Lambda? Okay, come and talk to me about that if you know anything about that. Great. That's me, basically. I used to work for AWS because I built this company from nothing to 500,000 monthly active users and had $300 a month in AWS bills. If your AWS bill is bigger than that, it's because you weren't using serverless computing. The reason that I used Lambda was because I was very interested in trying to work out how to use data centers and cloud in a very environmentally friendly way. And serverless and Lambda are very much an on-demand compute model. And I was trying to work out whether it was essentially a better way for me to use cloud compute. And so that was essentially, that's a very quick overview of that slide. So, and then I got to join AWS. So I worked for AWS from the end of last year until the middle of this year, going around telling everybody how wonderful AWS Lambda was and all the other technologies that goes with it. So I got to know all about how it works. Don't ask me, because I can't tell you anything about actually how it works, even though lots of people do ask me. But I also got to know a lot about how the technology works, how companies use it, and I got to see a lot of companies who are working in the IoT space, a number of companies in various other spaces working with this technology and doing some very cool things, and saving money, but also saving energy and saving power and saving time. But that's actually not so much interesting. There's not much that is interesting. Who knows much about community energy? Does anybody know anything about community energy? Oh, good. There's a few of you. I'm so glad I'm not on my own completely. So I'm a director of a community energy company. This is a new concept for pretty much all of you. So I'm going to have to explain it to you. So in the UK, you can actually set up your own energy company and have solar panels and wind farms and solar farms and do cool things like that. I recommend you look it up. There's Community Energy England and a few other things. I've been a director of this organisation called Wolverton Community Energy for just over 3 years now. It's a community benefit society. I don't make any money out of it. It's a voluntary position, essentially. And we have 2 sites. You can see lots and lots of solar panels. But it is actually an energy company. Those solar panels sit on the roof of 20 different units in a set of warehouses, and those warehouses have customers underneath them, and they pay us for energy. When the sun's shining, they basically buy our electricity. And so I've learned a lot about how the energy systems work and how grids work and how people basically don't like or think about their electricity very much. They literally just turn a light switch on most of the time and pretty much go, it's just electricity. And in fact, electricity is a commodity. It's all the same. It doesn't matter. And all that people do is try and get the best price for it. And most of the time, they actually don't care where it comes from. So just wanted to say, so Anne, this is Anne. This is a picture of her, obviously, not Anne herself. And Anne and I had a long conversation about a lot of this around data centers, because we'd read some stories beginning of end of last year, beginning of this year. And we realized that actually data centers were having a major impact on the amount of electricity they were using and on across the world, and we were a bit worried by this, so we started to do a bit of research, and hence why this talk. So what have data centers got to do with climate change? What's cloud got to do with climate change? Why is this even a thing? Does it make any sense? Well, they're not related. It kind of they don't seem to make any sense. So there's a couple of links there. If you want to go and have a look at those links, they would be good things to, basically they're the only things I want to care about. So those links there, okay, I'm going to give you like 20 seconds to point at them, look at them, write them down, get them, all the things. Basically, if the only thing that you come away from this is those 2 links, that's it, okay? That's just the whole talk. And then I'll just keep waffling for the rest of the 20 minutes that I've got. Basically, we wrote a white paper for the industry, and we basically said, you guys don't understand the impact that the tech world is having, and you need to understand it. And actually, what we want to do is set up a petition. So that's what this is. And so the talk is, we're going to go through we're going to talk through the white paper and a little bit of the problems and issues, and I'm going to just point out the petition that I'd like you to sign a bit later. So why are we doing this? So cloud, okay, right. Good question here. Who understands what cloud actually is? Brilliant. Fantastic. Right, cloud is not iCloud. Okay, that's Apple, who then used the word cloud as a marketing tool to sell you storage. Okay, that's all it is. Cloud is on-demand compute that you can buy from various vendors of cloud, like Amazon, who have Amazon Web Services, Google, who have Google Cloud Platform, Microsoft, who have Azure, and there are several others, and we'll go through a few of them later. We'll go through some big companies. But essentially, all it is allowing you to buy compute power. So what that means is, instead of going out and buying a computer, you essentially use a computer to click a button and go, you now have a virtual computer somewhere on the internet in a few minutes or a few seconds. Does that make sense? Good. That's what the cloud is. It's not what you think it is. It's that. Okay? And what happens is, it's great, because if you can make something that efficient for somebody, it's brilliant. You can go, right, I can spin up a resource, I can spin up a server, I can spin up 100 servers. In fact, I can spin up 1,000 servers in seconds. And just from a computer, I can just press a button, I can spin up 1,000 resources from a command line. But there's nothing there that tells me how much energy I've used, there's nothing there that tells me how much carbon I've released, there's nothing there that tells me anything other than I've just got 100 or 1,000 resources or whatever. And I just asked the question, actually, wouldn't it be interesting if we actually saw the amount of carbon we were releasing? And we don't. So that's a lot of why this has come about. And part of the problem is that IoT, everyone knows what IoT is? Who doesn't know? Anyone, please put your hand up. So there will be other people in the room. Okay, the Internet of Things. So basically anything connected to the internet, it's basic things like, everyone talks about fridges. I have no idea why. But basically little devices like internet-connected vacuum cleaners, like the Roomba is a good example. They reckon with research they've looked at, it's going to be roughly the data and the technology to push data around the internet is going to be roughly 3.5% of global carbon emissions. 3.5% of global carbon emissions by 2025, and possibly 14% by 2040. That's IoT, which apparently is going to save us from climate change. Yes? Who's heard that IoT is going to be the savior of climate change? Because I have. The ICT industry, that's the whole of technology, not just the internet and stuff in offices and stuff, could use 20% of all electricity and produce 5.5% of all carbon emissions by 2025. Tech is a problem. And data centers, so data centers are where basically those big buildings with lots and lots of servers, cloud is basically data centers on demand. We're around 2% of carbon emissions in 2015. That figure is basically, it's more than that, and no one's really sure how much more now. But essentially, we're at, the aviation industry is about 2% of carbon emissions, global carbon emissions. So data centers are worse than the global aviation industry. So if you're not doing lots of flying, but you are doing an awful lot of stuff in data centers, you're probably worse for the environment. You should probably stop doing data center stuff and fly a lot more, okay? Fine. Okay, I'm glad we got that one. Efficiency. Everyone wants to make everything more efficient. You make something more efficient, you'll use less of it. This is interesting because if you make something more efficient, like AWS, which is the cloud provider I mentioned earlier, basically makes cloud compute efficient. Look how much more money it makes now that it makes everything more efficient. This is something called Jevons paradox. Who's heard of Jevons paradox? Come on, this is an interactive. One person. Jevons paradox says if you make something more efficient, it leads to more demand. This blows people's minds. They're sitting there going, oh. So what actually happens is if we make something more efficient, there's a very easy way of explaining this. Do you remember how your parents used to say, oh, when I was a child, we didn't have hot water. We used to have baths once a week in a little pan in the corner, and now everyone has a shower every day. That's because we made hot water efficient. And now we use an awful lot more hot water than we used to. It's a very simple analogy, but it's exactly the point that I'm making. If you make cloud, which allows you to create instances of servers and compute more easily, it then creates more usage, and then more electricity gets used. And now you've heard all these, artificial intelligence, machine learning, IoT, and then you've heard all this cloud stuff again. We're just making compute more efficient. Compute being more efficient is fantastic, except it leads to increased demand, and increased demand is going to lead to increased global greenhouse gas emissions. It's just the way it works. So efficiency doesn't actually save us. Bitcoin. Who's not heard of Bitcoin? Good. Bitcoin and Ethereum. Who has heard about the amount of energy that Bitcoin uses? Good. Who's heard the statistic that it uses roughly 0.5% of the world's electricity? Wow, not enough of you. Right. Bitcoin mining electricity consumption is roughly the same as Austria. Austria. Do you know what mining is? Who understands what Bitcoin mining is? Oh, really? That's way too many of you. Right. Bitcoin mining is basically guessing numbers until you win. And that's everybody in a massive lottery until you win the number, and then you get the Bitcoin for winning that lottery, okay? And that's Bitcoin mining. That's just Bitcoin. That's one of the cryptocurrencies out there. There are thousands, or something stupid number anyway. Ethereum, which is another one, is as big as Iceland. This is terawatt hours of power. This is a stupid amount, and this is a massive waste of energy, because basically that's just proof of work, and it's ridiculous. So tech is essentially, as in the round, is essentially killing the planet. Brilliant. Well done, us. So we should all give up, not use tech, and go and live, in the middle of a field and farm everything. So no, it's just about the electricity world. It's about electricity networks. It's about grids. It's about understanding those. So now I asked this question of a few people. Who understands what offsetting is? Who's heard the word offsetting? Who's heard the word offsetting and doesn't understand it? Good. Brilliant. So these are the kinds of things that we talk about. So offsetting is a very interesting concept. Has anyone, just very quickly, I haven't got any idea of the time. There is no clock in front of me, so I have no idea what the time is. So can someone give me a kind of... Oh, good, fine. I've got loads of time. Brilliant. So offsetting. Offsetting. Someone earlier said, it's about planting trees. So it's not really about planting trees, so you can just give on. That used to be what everybody thought it was about, and it was a lovely way of people from the city, which was a very good point, actually, people from the city going, it's a fantastic way of making money, planting trees and living in the country. It's one way of doing it. It's not a very good way of doing it. It's not a very good way of offsetting your carbon. All it is going, this thing over here releases this amount of carbon, and this thing over here will not. And that's what, we'll basically stop this amount of carbon being released in some way, shape or form, or we'll take this amount of carbon out of the atmosphere in some way, shape or form. It's basically offsetting someone producing an amount of carbon by taking that out of the system somewhere else, okay? It's literally an offset. I can't do that. An offset, okay? So, simplest thing is someone over here uses coal-fired power station to produce a whole bunch of stuff. They produce 100, whatever it is of carbon. And over here, someone goes, well, I'm going to produce 100, whatever it is of solar panels, an amount of that, so that I can take out the same amount of carbon that I'm using over here. Okay? That's all offsetting is. Does everyone understand that? Have I made that clear? It's just literally balancing out. So the idea is that you just feel better about life because you're not making the situation worse. Okay? The problem is if your company grows and instead of 100 you're making 120, what actually happens is you create more carbon. You're still not making more carbon over here, but if your company grows, so if you're an AWS or someone else, and your company grows massively, like I just showed you in that graph, then what actually happens is if you just keep offsetting, the amount of carbon you generate and the amount of carbon that goes into the atmosphere still goes up. You just offset more. Does that make sense? So you kick the can down the road. So you're not actually fixing anything necessarily. You're just not making it that much worse. So it's not that bad. I just kind of had to explain offsetting because not everybody understands it. So why am I explaining all of this? So when Anne and I went through this white paper, so the white paper is basically what this talk is about. When we went through the white paper, we took the top 6 cloud providers. And bear in mind, this is very much a talk for technical people. Don't worry if you're not technical. This will make sense. And we basically took them and said, right, let's have a look at how sustainable, how good their energy mix is, whether they are able to give us the information we want around their, do they offset, what do they do? Basically, are they good or bad in terms of climate change? And so we looked at them in this order. So AWS, which is Amazon Web Services. So Amazon is a very large company, second largest company in the world, largest cloud provider. They're massively secretive in the way that they talk about stuff. Yes, they have a sustainability page. No, they don't tell us anything. They also have carbon neutral regions, but they're a bit confused about what that means. For example, one of the carbon neutral regions possibly uses, but we don't know, possibly uses nuclear. And I'm wondering in Brighton that may be a bad thing. But they're also planning to go 100% carbon neutral. Yay! But there's absolutely no timescale on that. So we have no idea when they're going to do it. And they're also some of the renewable projects that they do are pushing prices up for local consumers, which is a bad thing. So essentially, local consumers are paying for the price of your electricity if you use their cloud. Is that a good or a bad thing? I think that's probably a little bit iffy, to say the least. So a little bit of an opinion on that. A lot of what they do is marketing. They're definitely hedging their bets. So they're still putting money into other things. And they don't really give us any public data, and you can't really go carbon neutral. Oh, one thing I should have pointed out, they do have 5 carbon neutral regions. So Ireland, Frankfurt, Montreal, and Oregon. So if you do anything on AWS, just out of interest, who does anything on AWS? Yes, right. For all of those of you, please move everything to Ireland, Frankfurt, Montreal, and Oregon, ASAP, because those ones are the ones that use renewable energy. They're very customer driven. If you don't like that, please tell them that you don't like that, or move away. Tell them you're going to move away, because that's not a good position, if you think that's important. So Azure, so this is Microsoft, so this is just very quick. Microsoft, they actually offset their carbon emissions with something called carbon certificates. Now, who knows what carbon certificates are? A few people. Carbon certificates are basically a big piece of paper saying, someone else, I'm going to pay someone else to do the offsetting for me somewhere over there. So instead of doing the offsetting, they pay someone to do the offsetting for them. Kind of okay, and it should be fine, and someone else will probably do the auditing for them, and it's probably fine. But it's imperfect, because they don't really audit themselves. But Microsoft are actually a pretty good company. Who knew that they actually offset all their flights? Microsoft, we like Microsoft. They're also involved in the Open Compute project, which works with Datacentres. So, and the Open Compute project looks at trying to make data centers more efficient and more carbon neutral. And they're carbon neutral by default as a company. Again, not entirely clear where they're going, but they're doing okay. And they could improve by using things like direct renewables, but we like Azure. So Google, who knew Google were a cloud provider? Not enough of you. Okay, so, and from 2017, they offset 100% of their electricity. Did you know that? No. They're also the biggest corporate supplier of renewables in the world. This is Google. This is a company we all think about when we're just searching for stuff. They actually are. They offset everything and they buy renewable. So they're not buying certificates, they're actually buying renewable resources and putting those back in. So we do love Google. Again, we love Google, and we'd love them to do more with renewables, and we'd love them to put more energy into understanding the networks around it and the grids, and not just offsetting, but doing more. Alibaba. Who's heard of Alibaba? Who's heard of them as a cloud? A few people. Did someone say what? Oh, good. Yep, they're not just a company that sells stuff from China. They are actually a cloud. Basically, there's almost nothing on the internet about them in terms of their renewables. They're very dirty energy, very dirty electricity mix in China, which is where their big base is and where their biggest customers are. If you look at how much of China is based on coal still, basically bad. So unfortunately, we kind of have to assume the worst, that they're not very good in terms of their renewables. So that's bad. So we're having to assume that they're having a pretty negative impact on climate change, which is a bad thing. Oracle, who knew they were a cloud company? So again, not very much. I'm talking to the wrong audience. I'm going to swish through this then. So they're a very green company, apparently. They have some renewable regions. 29% of total electricity resources are renewable, and their goal is 33% by 2020. Isn't that pretty poor? They're not even trying, as far as I can tell. They're just kind of going, yeah, we'll do it at some point. So yeah, you can actually use them in the UK, but probably should be using them elsewhere. So Oracle could do a lot better. And they do it. I mean, you can read a massive long report, which is very, very boring, which tells you all about the exact amount of electricity they use. But yeah, it's fun. So IBM is a big company, lots of advertising, looks good. They do procure quite a lot of data center energy from renewables, brilliant. They've also had a long-standing commitment to climate change since the 70s, and that's been interesting as well. Oh, too far. No, too far. There we go. They could do better. We have no way of knowing. You can't put a workload on a region that says that it's 100% renewable. So again, IBM's a little bit of a kind of, they could do an awful lot better. But they seem to be, there's an improvement over some of the others. So it's a little bit poor. So we kind of like IBM. They're all very lovely people at IBM. And you kind of feel like you don't want to be too mean to them because, IBM's nice, but they could do an awful lot better. Overall, we've kind of looked at the amount of energy across and the size of the clouds and everything else. And we're reckoning, because we can't know exactly how much AWS uses and how much across all of them and who uses what, we're reckoning around 25 to 40% across all the clouds is powered by renewables. So that's entire cloud computing over those 6 providers, we reckon is between 25 and 40%. And it's incredibly difficult to know what that is. And again, what's renewable, we don't know. So comes back to my original point. If we're growing at such speed in terms of cloud and cloud usage and cloud technology, if we're only at that level, that's not very good. And we have a massive problem because Cisco and Huawei and others have done research which has shown that we're going to be growing at something like 5 times in the next 7 years. So 5 times the amount of data going through these networks. This is Netflix is one big thing. And that data is going to mean an increase in the number of data centers. We've kind of looked at it as roughly 10 times the amount of renewable energy that's going to be needed. We actually don't know, because we don't know how much efficiency is going to come through. It could be 8 times, 6 times. It's certainly going to be a lot. But we're guessing 10 times, because that's as far as we can work it out. And if you get 10 times, if you need 10 times the amount of renewable capacity just to offset, that's a significant amount just to get to parity, just to get to 100%. It's not straightforward. We're actually, this is in 7 years. That's a lot of energy that we need to produce. So the cloud and data center world needs to do an awful lot of work to get anywhere near being capable of providing this. So why am I, I'm just basically making you all feel dreadful about this right now, because that's terrible. So it's about us. It's actually about us in the room and us as consumers of services. AWS is, I used to work there. One of the things that they said is, if you look at their leadership principles, the top one is customer obsession, which sounds very, very creepy. It's actually very interesting, because if a customer comes along and says, I want you to do this, I'm really bothered by something, I want you to do something for me, they will bend over backwards to try and do stuff for you. So take advantage of that and tell them that you want them to go carbon neutral in whatever region that you're using, if it's London or wherever, but put the pressure on them. But do that for every single provider, because if we make this a thing, if we make it a socially unacceptable for them to not be renewable, then we may just cause a ripple that will then spread out, because the tech industry is incredibly rich. And these companies we're talking about, Amazon is the second largest company in the world. I haven't even talked about Apple, because Apple technically isn't a cloud provider. And Apple is incredibly rich as well. And so we have all of these opportunities to grow these companies, to do some fascinating things, but get them to do it in the right way, to get them to put their energies and time and their money into researching energy networks, and actually then changing the world for the better. Because these companies could research some of the technologies that then make Africa electricity networks significantly better, cheaper, and more available. We can do that by putting pressure on them now through the data centers. So Anne and I, so that's Anne's Twitter and my Twitter. We've created the white paper. Please share. Please talk about it. Please, even if you don't understand it, please have a read and share it with people who are techie, because there are enough of them who you'll know. Please talk to them. Please just basically share it with all the people who you think will understand it. That's all. We've tried to make it as easily understood as possible, and we're very approachable people. And this is the big thing to share, which is the cloud ratings. It's basically Google at the top, Azure second place, AWS comes third, but only if you use certain regions. Oracle, IBM, and Alibaba come a bit further down. That's a good slide to take a photo of and share and go, just to get it across. And then everyone goes, "Where's that from?" And you go, "Oh, this white paper thing." But that's what we're trying to get out there. So, and there's a pledge. So the pledge is basically that we want these companies, and we want every company to go sustainable and use sustainable servers, so sustainably powered, renewably powered, whatever it is, but essentially not carbon neutral is about as good as we can get by 2024. Why 2024? It's roughly 5 years, and actually companies don't like to do things immediately. They like to think about things and take their times, and chief financial officers take time over things, and if you give them 5 years, they might do stuff, and then they won't feel like they've been pressured into it. So 5 years is a pretty good timescale for most of these companies. But if we can get them to do this, we can get companies to start thinking about this and do this now and talking about it, then we'll get somewhere. So that's the pledge. Please sign. Please go on there if you haven't already. And if you want to give something to your developers who actually use AWS, I built this. If you want to talk about hack day ideas, I built a little hack day idea, which, well, I've already done this, so you can't do this one. But you can have a look at it. There's a cloud sustainability console, which is essentially just, instead of your AWS, down the right-hand side, if you go and click on your regions, it just marks them in green. It's actually really useful. Only works in English, because I basically built it in about an hour. But essentially, that's all it does, and it just gives you links there. So just if you want your developers to think about the fact that actually they need to be sustainable when they're building stuff, that's a really useful thing to do. And again, tell your provider, even if they're a data center that doesn't use the cloud, tell your data center that you want them to go green. Tell them that you want them to use sustainable energy. This is really, really important. And there's that, which you've already seen. There's me. Thank you very much.